Good evening all, and welcome back to Untold Fears. Tonight, you will journey deep into the heart of Tennessee, through forgotten hollers and mist-shrouded crossroads where secrets linger just beyond the light, and fear is as thick as the fog that crawls through the valleys. These are not tourist tales or campfire fiction, but the disturbing truths whispered in small towns, the stories locals share in hushed tones when they think no one else is listening. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Back in 2019, I was 24 years old, living alone in my grandmother's old farmhouse just outside Adams, Tennessee after she passed away. I inherited the property and decided to fix it up before selling it. But I never expected what would happen during those 3 months I spent in that house. My grandmother had lived there for 40 years, and I had visited countless times as a child, running through the fields and sleeping over on weekends without ever feeling anything out of the ordinary. But the moment I moved in after her funeral, something felt different. The air inside felt heavier somehow, like the house itself was holding its breath. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, surrounded by 30 acres of overgrown fields and woods that pressed in close on 3 sides. The nearest neighbor was Mrs. Henderson, who lived about half a mile down the road, and she was in her 80s and mostly kept to herself. I worked the night shift at the regional hospital in Clarksville, which meant I would arrive home around 7 in the morning, sleep until mid-afternoon, and then have a few hours before heading back to work. It was an isolated existence, and looking back now, I realize how vulnerable that made me. The first week passed without incident. I was too busy sorting through my grandmother's belongings, boxing up her clothes and photographs, scrubbing years of dust from the corners. The house was old, built sometime in the 1890s, according to the deed, and it made all the usual sounds that old houses make. The floorboards creaked when you walked across them. The windows rattled when the wind picked up. The pipes groaned and clanked when you ran the hot water. I told myself these were normal things, nothing to worry about. But then the knocking started. It was the second week, on a Tuesday night around 2 in the morning. I had just gotten home from my shift and was making myself something to eat in the kitchen when I heard it. 3 distinct knocks coming from inside the wall next to the refrigerator. Knock, knock, knock. I froze with my hand on the cabinet door and listened. Silence. I waited for a full minute, but nothing else happened. I convinced myself it was the pipes, even though it had not sounded like pipes at all. It had sounded exactly like someone knocking on wood with their knuckles. The knocking happened again the next night. This time, it came from the wall in my bedroom, right next to where my head rested on the pillow. 3 knocks, deliberate and measured, each one a second apart. I sat up in bed and stared at the wall in the darkness. The wallpaper was old and yellowed, with a faded floral pattern that my grandmother had put up decades ago. I reached out and knocked back, feeling foolish even as I did it. Nothing responded. I eventually fell asleep, but my dreams were uneasy and filled with shadows. On the 4th night, something new happened. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a scratching sound at the window. It was rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across the glass. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I got up and pulled back the curtain, half expecting to see a tree branch scraping against the pane. But there was nothing there. The nearest tree was 20 feet away, and there was no wind that night. The air outside was perfectly still, and the moon hung full and bright in the clear sky. I pressed my face against the cold glass and looked down at the ground below the window. Nothing moved in the silver light. No animals, no branches, nothing that could explain the sound I had just heard. I went outside in my pajamas and bare feet, walking around the perimeter of the house with the flashlight. The grass was wet with dew and cold against my skin. I examined every window, looking for marks or scratches, but the glass was clean. I felt ridiculous standing there in the middle of the night, shining my flashlight at the side of an empty house. But when I went back inside and climbed into bed, the scratching started again. This time it was louder, more insistent, and it came from 2 windows at once. The one next to my bed and the one across the room. I pulled the blankets over my head and waited for it to stop. It continued for what felt like hours before finally falling silent just before dawn. The next morning, I called my mother and told her about the noises. She suggested it might be mice in the walls or raccoons on the roof. I wanted to believe her, but I knew what I had heard. Those sounds were not being made by animals. They were too deliberate, too purposeful. But I did not say that to my mother because I did not want her to think I was losing my mind. Instead, I thanked her for the advice and told her I would set some traps. That night, I worked my usual shift at the hospital. When I got home the next morning, I noticed something strange. There were handprints on the inside of the living room window, 4 of them, pressed against the glass as if someone had been standing inside the house looking out. But I lived alone, and I had not touched that window in days. The prints were smaller than my own hands, more delicate, with long, slender fingers. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I cleaned them off with glass cleaner and tried to forget about them. But the handprints appeared again the next day, this time on the kitchen window, and then on the bathroom mirror. Always the same size, always pressed against the glass from the inside. I stopped cleaning them off because they would just reappear, and it was starting to frighten me in a way I could not fully explain. It was the deliberateness of it that scared me most. Someone or something was trying to communicate, and I did not want to know what it was trying to say. 2 weeks into my stay, the sounds escalated. I came home from work one morning to find all the cabinet doors in the kitchen standing open. I knew I had closed them the night before because I always closed them. It was a habit my grandmother had insisted on, and I had continued it without thinking. But now every single door hung open, revealing the neat rows of dishes and glasses inside. I closed them all and went to bed, but I could not sleep. I lay there listening to the house, waiting for something else to happen. It did not take long. Around noon, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. Slow, measured steps, like someone walking carefully to avoid making too much noise. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps moved from one end of the hall to the other, then stopped directly outside my door. I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light that came through the gap at the bottom of the door. Someone was standing there, waiting. I wanted to call out to demand who was there, but my voice would not work. The fear had wrapped itself around my throat like a cold hand. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow moved away, and the footsteps continued down the hall. I heard them descend the stairs, one creaking step at a time, and then silence. I got out of bed and opened my door. The hallway was empty. I checked every room in the house, looking in closets and behind doors, but I was completely alone. There was no one there. There had never been anyone there. That night, I called my best friend Sarah and asked if I could stay with her for a few days. I told her I needed a break from the house, that it was getting to me being there alone. She agreed immediately, and I packed a bag and drove to her apartment in Nashville. I spent 3 days there, sleeping on her couch and trying not to think about the farmhouse. But I knew I had to go back. I had made a commitment to my grandmother to take care of her property, and I was not going to break that promise because of some strange noises. When I returned to the house, everything seemed normal at first. The silence felt almost welcoming after the constant unease of the previous weeks. I unpacked my bag and made myself dinner, and for the first time in days, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. Maybe I had just been stressed and tired, and my mind had been playing tricks on me. Maybe there was a logical explanation for everything that had happened. But that night, everything changed. I was lying in bed reading when I heard it. A woman's voice, singing. It was coming from somewhere in the house, a hymn I recognized from my grandmother's funeral. The voice was clear and beautiful, rising and falling with perfect pitch. I set down my book and listened, my heart hammering in my chest. The singing was coming from the hallway, just beyond my closed bedroom door. I got out of bed and stood there in my pajamas trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to grab my keys and drive away and never come back. But another part of me, the part that had spent countless childhood summers in this house, wanted to understand what was happening. I reached for the doorknob and turned it slowly, easing the door open just a crack. The hallway was dark except for a faint glow coming from the far end near my grandmother's old bedroom. The singing was louder now, the words clear and distinct. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the light. There was a figure standing at the end of the hall, a woman in a long white nightgown, her back to me, facing the door to my grandmother's room. Her hair was long and dark and hung down past her shoulders. She was translucent, like looking at someone through frosted glass. I could see the outline of the door frame through her body. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak or breathe. The woman continued singing, her voice filling the hallway with sound. Then slowly, as if she sensed my presence, she began to turn around. I did not want to see her face. Some deep instinct told me that if I saw her face, something terrible would happen. I stumbled backward and reached for my bedroom door, but my hands were shaking so badly I could not grasp the handle. The woman was fully turned now, facing me directly. Where her face should have been, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to pull the light from the air around it. She took a step toward me, and then another, gliding across the floor without making a sound. The singing had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. I finally managed to grab the door and pull myself back into my bedroom, slamming it shut and turning the lock. I pressed my back against the wood and slid down to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. There was a knock on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, the same pattern I had been hearing for weeks. Then another 3 knocks, and another. The knocking continued for hours, never stopping, never changing rhythm. I sat there on the floor with my hands pressed over my ears, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally rose and light began filtering through my bedroom window, the knocking stopped. I waited another hour before I finally worked up the courage to open the door. The hallway was empty and bright with morning sun. Everything looked normal, peaceful, ordinary. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard, and I knew I could not stay in that house another night. I called my friend Sarah from the driveway and told her everything. She did not question me or try to convince me I had imagined it. She just told me to come to her apartment and we would figure out what to do. I threw some clothes in a bag and left, not bothering to lock the door behind me. I never went back inside that house again. Sarah helped me research the property's history. We discovered that a woman had died in the house in 1892, just 2 years after it was built. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, and according to the records we found, she had died of unknown causes in her sleep. The newspaper article about her death mentioned that she had been known for her beautiful singing voice and that she sang in the church choir. No other details were available, but it was enough. I understood now what had been happening in that house. Eleanor had never left. I sold the property as is 6 months later to someone who did not believe in ghosts. I told the buyer that the house needed work and that there were some issues with the plumbing and electrical, but I did not mention Eleanor. Part of me felt guilty about that, but another part of me reasoned that maybe Eleanor would not bother someone who did not believe in her. Maybe she only appeared to people who were open to seeing her. I wonder if they still live there. I wonder if they hear the knocking in the walls and the singing in the hallways. I wonder if they have seen her standing at the end of the hall with that darkness where her face should be. Sometimes I think about driving back to Adams and checking on the place, but I never do. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way, and I have no desire to open that one again. In the summer of 2017, I was working third shift at a gas station on Highway 25, outside Jellicoe, Tennessee. I was 19 years old, and it was one of those tiny truck stop places where you might see 5 customers the whole night. The pay was not great, but it was easy money for a kid who had just graduated high school and was trying to save up for community college. My shift ran from midnight to 8 in the morning, and for the first few months, nothing unusual ever happened. Just truckers stopping for coffee and cigarettes, the occasional local coming in for beer or snacks, and long stretches of emptiness where I would sit behind the counter playing games on my phone. The building itself was small and dated, with 2 gas pumps out front that looked like they had been there since the 80s. Inside there were 3 aisles of basic supplies, a cooler full of drinks along the back wall, and a hot food section that never worked properly. The lighting was harsh and fluorescent, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. Behind the counter where I sat, there was a stool, a register, and a wooden baseball bat that my manager kept tucked in the corner. He told me on my first day that if anyone ever tried to rob the place, I should just give them the money and not be a hero. The bat was only there to make me feel safer, he said, but I should never actually use it. My manager was a man named Dale, who owned 3 gas stations in the area and rarely showed up to this one. He would stop by maybe once a week to collect the deposits and check that everything was running smoothly. The rest of the time, I was completely on my own. The isolation never bothered me at first. I liked the quiet, the sense that I was the only person awake for miles around. But that changed after what happened with Eddie. Eddie was a regular customer, a trucker who would stop by every Tuesday and Thursday night around 2 in the morning. He drove long hauls between Nashville and Cincinnati, and our station was one of his usual stops. He was a friendly guy, probably in his 50s, with a gray beard and a Tennessee Titans cap he always wore. We would chat while he bought his coffee and whatever snacks he wanted for the road. He told me about his wife back in Nashville, his 2 grown daughters, the places he had been. I looked forward to seeing him because it broke up the monotony of the night. Then one week, Eddie did not show up. Tuesday came and went with no sign of him. Thursday passed the same way. I figured maybe his route had changed or he was on vacation. But when 2 full weeks went by without him stopping in, I started to wonder. Then one night, a different trucker came in, a younger guy I had seen a few times before, and while he was paying for his items, he asked me if I had heard about the missing driver. I told him I had not, and he pulled out his phone to show me a Facebook post that was being shared around the trucking community. The post had a picture of Eddie, the same friendly face I had gotten to know over the past few months. According to the text, he had been reported missing after failing to complete a delivery. His truck had been found abandoned at a rest stop about 30 miles from here, but there was no sign of Eddie himself. The post asked anyone with information to contact the police. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as I stared at the picture. The last place Eddie had been seen, according to the post, was at a gas station on Highway 25 outside Jellicoe. This gas station. The next day, I called the police and gave them a statement. I told them that Eddie had been a regular customer and that I had seen him many times, but I could not remember the specific last time he had been in because the nights all blended together. They thanked me for the information and said they would be in touch if they needed anything else. I hung up feeling uneasy, like I should have been able to remember more details, something that might help them find him. But the truth was, I had no idea what had happened to Eddie, and the thought that something terrible might have occurred somewhere near where I worked every night made me nervous in a way I had not been before. After that, I started paying more attention to the customers who came in. I looked at their faces, tried to remember details about them, noticed the vehicles they drove. Most of the people were harmless, just tired travelers passing through. But there was one man who started coming in regularly, who made me uncomfortable from the very beginning. He would show up around 3 in the morning, always alone, always in the same beat-up sedan. He never bought much, just a pack of cigarettes or an energy drink, but he would linger in the store for 20 or 30 minutes, walking up and down the aisles slowly, picking up items and putting them back. The first time I noticed him doing this, I thought maybe he was just killing time, trying to stay awake on a long drive. But it kept happening, night after night, and I started to realize he was watching me. He would position himself at the end of one of the aisles, where he had a clear view of the counter, and he would just stand there pretending to look at the shelves while his eyes stayed fixed on me. When I would look directly at him, he would quickly grab something random and bring it to the counter, making small talk while I rang him up. He never smiled. His voice was flat and emotionless, and he had this way of staring that made my skin crawl. One night, he asked me what time I got off work. The question caught me off guard, and I lied instinctively, telling him my manager would be arriving at 6. He nodded slowly and said that was good, that it was not safe for someone to be alone out here all night. Then he paid for his cigarettes and left. I watched through the window as he sat in his car in the parking lot for another 10 minutes before finally driving away. After that, I started keeping the baseball bat on the counter next to the register instead of tucked away in the corner. He came back 3 more times over the next week, each visit following the same pattern. He would browse the aisles while watching me, buy something small, ask me strange questions. Once he asked if I lived nearby. Another time he wanted to know if I had ever seen anything weird happen at the station late at night. His questions felt like he was testing me, trying to figure something out. I gave vague answers and tried to appear calm, but inside I was terrified. I called my manager Dale and told him about the guy, described his car and his behavior. Dale said he would try to be around more during my shifts, but he never showed up when I needed him to. Then one night, about 3 weeks after Eddie's disappearance, something happened that changed everything. I was working my usual shift, and it was one of those dead quiet nights where hours would pass without a single customer. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a car pull up to the pumps outside. Through the window, I could see it was the strange man in his sedan. My heart started pounding immediately. He did not get gas. He just parked at the pump and sat there in his car, the engine running, staring at the store. I picked up the phone and held it in my hand, ready to call the police if he tried to come inside, but he just sat there for what felt like forever, maybe 20 minutes, just watching. Then finally he turned off his engine and got out of the car. I stood up behind the counter, gripping the baseball bat with my other hand. He walked toward the door slowly, his hands in his pockets, and when he pushed it open, the bell above the door chimed, and the sound made me jump. He came inside and stopped just past the entrance, looking around the empty store. Then he looked at me and said he wanted to ask me something important. I told him I was busy and that he needed to either make a purchase or leave. He ignored me and kept walking toward the counter. His eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. He asked me if the police had talked to me about the missing trucker. I said yes, they had. He nodded and said that was what he thought. Then he told me I should be careful about what I told the police, that sometimes it was better to mind your own business and not get involved in things that did not concern me. I told him I did not know what he was talking about and that he needed to leave. He leaned against the counter and said he was just trying to give me some friendly advice. He said this was a dangerous area, that bad things happened out here on the highway, and that a young kid like me should not be working alone at night. He said it would be a shame if something happened to me. Then he asked again what time I got off work, and this time I told him my manager was in the back office. I said it loudly, hoping he would believe me and leave. He smiled for the first time since I had known him, a cold smile that did not reach his eyes, and said he did not think that was true. I was about to pick up the phone and call the police right in front of him when he finally pushed away from the counter and said he needed to get going. He walked back toward the door, and just before he left, he turned and told me to have a good night, that he would see me around. The door closed behind him, and I watched as he got in his car and pulled out of the parking lot. But instead of driving away down the highway, he turned into the far corner of the lot and parked again. He turned off his lights, but I could see his silhouette sitting in the driver's seat just watching the building. I immediately called the police and told them there was a man outside who had threatened me, that I felt unsafe and needed help. The dispatcher said they would send someone right away and told me to lock the doors and stay inside. I locked the doors and turned off some of the interior lights so it would be harder for him to see me. I kept my eyes on his car, watching for any movement, He just sat there, not moving, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after about an hour, I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser coming down the highway. The moment the police car turned into the parking lot, the man started his engine and drove away quickly, heading north on the highway. The police tried to follow him, but he was already too far ahead. The two officers came inside and took my statement. I described the man and his car in as much detail as I could remember. I told them about all his previous visits, the strange questions, the veiled threats. They asked if I had gotten his license plate number, and I said I had not, that I had been too scared to go outside and check. They told me they would increase patrols in the area and that I should call immediately if he came back. Over the next few days, I learned more about what had happened to Eddie. The police had found his truck abandoned at a rest stop, and inside they discovered evidence that suggested foul play. Blood on the driver's seat, signs of a struggle, but no body. They were treating it as a homicide investigation, though they had not officially released that information to the public yet. The officer who came by the station to ask me follow-up questions told me this in confidence, warning me to be extra careful. He said they believed someone had been targeting people who worked night shifts alone in isolated locations, and that there might be other victims they had not found yet. I was terrified. I wanted to quit immediately, but I needed the money, and I could not afford to walk away from the job without having something else lined up. Dale finally agreed to schedule another employee to work with me during the overnight shifts, at least temporarily, but it took him almost 2 weeks to find someone. During those 2 weeks, I barely slept during the day, constantly anxious about having to go back to work. Each night, I saw the strange man's car a few more times, always driving slowly past the station around 3 or 4 in the morning, but he never stopped again. Then about 2 months after Eddie disappeared, the police made an arrest. A man named Marcus Webb was taken into custody in connection with multiple murders in Tennessee and Kentucky. The news report said he had been killing people who worked alone at night, truck drivers and gas station clerks and security guards, anyone he could find vulnerable and isolated. He would stalk them first, learn their routines, and then make his move. They found evidence linking him to at least 7 murders, including Eddie's. They discovered Eddie's body buried in a wooded area not far from where his truck had been found. When I saw Marcus Webb's picture on the news, I felt like I was going to be sick. It was him, the man who had been coming into my store, watching me, threatening me. He was the one who had killed Eddie and all those other people. If the police had not shown up that night when I called, I might have been his next victim. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down because my legs would not hold me up anymore. The police contacted me and asked me to come in and identify him in a lineup. I did, and my testimony ended up being part of the case against him. Marcus Webb was eventually convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial took almost a year, and I had to testify about the encounters I had had with him at the gas station. It was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do, sitting in that courtroom and looking at him while I described how afraid I had been, knowing that he had planned to kill me just like he had killed all those others. I quit my job at the gas station the week after his arrest. I did not care that I had not found another job yet. I could not go back there, could not stand behind that counter, knowing what had almost happened. Dale understood and paid me for 2 extra weeks as a severance, which helped me get by until I found work at a warehouse during the day shift. I have not worked a night shift since then, and I never will again. I do not care how good the pay is, how easy the work might be. Nothing is worth putting yourself in that kind of danger. I still think about Eddie sometimes, about his wife and daughters, about how he was just doing his job and trying to make a living when his life was stolen from him. I think about all the other victims too, people whose names I never knew, but who died in the same senseless way. And I think about how close I came to being one of them, how a single phone call and the quick response of 2 police officers saved my life that night. I'm 26 now, and I have moved away from Jellicoe, started over in a different town where nobody knows what happened to me. But I still look over my shoulder when I am out at night. Still check the faces of strangers and wonder what they might be capable of. That kind of fear never really leaves you. It just becomes part of who you are, a permanent shadow that follows you everywhere you go. And I would not wish that on anyone. When I think about what happened that night behind Charlotte's house, the memory flickers like lights in the mist, shaping and reshaping itself until I am not sure where fear ends and reality begins. This was 2015 and I was 15, full of that careless confidence you have when you're still convinced nothing in the world can harm you if you stick close to friends. Charlotte and I had been best friends since kindergarten. Her family lived in Wartburg, up against the edge of the Cumberland Plateau, a dense green place where small clearings give way to shadowy trees, and the woods seem endless. Her parents were farmers who loved big family gatherings, fire pits, and letting us roam the property as long as we checked in every few hours. It was the kind of place where the nearest streetlight was half a mile away, and your only real sense of time came from the call of morning crows and the light shifting through the canopy overhead. That weekend, I stayed over at Charlotte's because we had planned a backyard camping night. I brought an old tent, a ratty sleeping bag, and way too many snacks. Her parents liked to let us have the run of the yard and even the first 100 meters or so into the woods, as long as we promised not to cross the fence where their property met the state forest. We were sure nothing bad ever happened in sleepy Wartburg. The sort of thing you heard about happened other places, anywhere but here. After dinner, we dragged our supplies into the field behind her house. We set up our tent next to a half-dead pine at the edge of the woods, close enough to see the porch light in the distance, but far enough to feel brave. We built our little fire, roasting marshmallows and telling each other the creepiest stories we could remember. Eventually, Charlotte's little brother lost interest and wandered inside, leaving us with just each other and the gentle hum of crickets and tree frogs. Somewhere around 11, the fire burned to embers. We lay back on a plaid blanket, staring at the stars peeking through the clouds. The day's warmth lingered, turning the air heavy and sweet. It should have been perfect, except we had both started feeling that odd, hair-raising sense you sometimes get when you are watched. I would stare into the black tree line, convinced I saw small movements just far enough to be uncertain. Charlotte noticed too, but when I brought it up, she shrugged that it was probably just an armadillo or a raccoon. That is when we heard the humming. At first, it was so faint that I thought it was just wind, but the sound grew, a low vibration that did not fit the night, a droning, almost musical note that seemed to hover at the edge of our hearing. It rose and fell, pulsing like a heartbeat. Charlotte and I sat up, scanning the trees. She whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded. I found my flashlight and swept its beam through the undergrowth, half expecting a pair of animal eyes. The beam wobbled as my hand shook. The noise stopped suddenly, leaving a silence loud enough to make my ears ring. I let out a shaky laugh and started making jokes to break the tension, but Charlotte's face stayed tense. Suddenly, every cricket and frog seemed to have been muted at once. The stillness pressed in, making the air thick. Even the distant barking of a neighbor's dog faded away. The silence was absolute. From the far side of the field, down by the fence, where the forest began in earnest, we saw the first light. At first, I thought it might be a flashlight. A soft orange glow moving between the trees, floating just above the ground. It blinked and bobbed, joined a moment later by a second pale blue light. Together they moved in a dance, swirling around each other, rising and falling, without any visible source holding them. My mouth went dry. Charlotte grabbed my arm so hard her fingernails bit into my skin. For a long moment, we sat in stunned silence, watching as the orbs floated around the fence, drawing closer with hypnotic calm. Their light did not brighten the grass or trees or cast shadows. It just glowed, unreal, untouchable. It is hard to say how long we watched, lost between terror and wonder. Charlotte began to whisper prayers, her voice trembling. I was frozen, my thoughts cycling between running for the house and screaming for her parents. But I was afraid that any sudden noise from us might bring those lights closer, might provoke whatever intelligence or intention lay behind them. At one point, the blue orb darted ahead of the orange and came to rest just inside our property line. We heard an audible crack as if something heavy snapped a branch. Both lights hovered for a second, then advanced again, pulsing in a rhythm, one that felt almost alive, like a breath or a warning. Charlotte finally found her voice and screamed for her dad, her voice splitting the silence. We heard a shout from the house, her father, startled by her scream. Then the back door banged open and his flashlight danced wildly through the dark. Charlotte's dad was a Vietnam vet and never went outside at night without his old hunting shotgun. I saw the glint of metal as he crashed through the grass toward us. As his beam cut across the yard, the orbs drifted apart. The orange one faded to nothing, vanishing in a single, silent pop, while the blue orb zipped back into the trees so quickly it almost looked like the light had been snuffed out by a hand. The droning hum started again, then died the moment Charlotte's dad reached us. We tumbled into the house, our hearts pounding, tripping over each other's feet. As Charlotte's mom fussed over us, her dad went back outside, heading toward where the lights had been, shotgun at the ready and his big work boots pounding the grass. He returned 15 minutes later, confused and half angry, saying he found a perfect circle trampled into the grass near the fence. Grass bent and flattened in, a spiral, not cut or broken. I slept in a guest room that night, but I barely closed my eyes. I kept seeing the orbs playing through my imagination, taunting me with the silent question of what might have happened had we been braver or more foolish and tried to approach them. The next day, we went out to inspect the circle with her dad. The spiral was still visible, dark green grass pressed deep into the earth, the scent of crushed plants sharp. At the center was a ring of ash, not from our campfire, but older, grayer, delicate as cigarette ash left too long on a tray. No animal prints, Charlotte's dad insisted. No signs of people either, unless you counted the absence of footprints. Just that eerie, immaculate spiral. He muttered something about kids playing tricks, but his eyes darted back to the woods more than once as he walked the fence. Charlotte's mom called a neighbor up the road, and soon 3 families had come to view the site. Every single one of them told us the same thing. That area of the property had never grown right, not since the water table shifted years before. And sometimes, late at night, strange lights could be seen floating in the forest. Some said it was methane flames. Others blamed it on swamp gas, old miners, or even residual static from a long-gone power line. Nobody seemed eager to test their theory or linger after dark. All day, Charlotte and I huddled in the house, alternating between speculating and swearing we would never go back outside after sunset. Yet by dusk, curiosity got the better of us. This time we brought her brother, figuring there was safety in numbers. With flashlights and trembling courage, we crept down to the fence line. We waited, whispering nervously until the sky turned black. But there were no lights that night, and the spiral looked less mysterious in the harsh beam of our flashlights. Just flattened grass in a field that had seen its share of storms and wandering animals. That might have been the end of things, a one-night story to share and embellish. But as the summer wore on, we heard more odd stories. 2 neighbors claimed to see orbs moving through the woods. Another swore they saw a transparent figure gliding through the trees, accompanied by the same humming Charlotte and I had witnessed. Reports filtered in of animals refusing to cross patches of the woods, of children waking up at night certain they had been watched through the windows. By August, the spiral patch in the grass had become bare, the dirt cold to the touch no matter how hot the sun. Charlotte's dad even sent a soil sample to the nearest university. A friend in the agriculture department poked at the sample and said nothing was unusual, except nothing ever grew there again. The final straw came late that fall. Charlotte's dad, never the superstitious type, installed security cameras aimed at the field. We caught glimpses of flickering lights, movements that did not correspond to animals. But the images were blurry, as if the cameras resisted capturing what we needed to see. One night, the house's power went out at exactly 2:13 a.m., and when the power resumed, all the cameras had reset to factory settings, erasing their memory. Charlotte's dad switched to old-school vigilance every night for a week, but nothing happened while he watched. By senior year, Charlotte's family had decided to move to southern Tennessee, far away from the haunting pressure of the woods. The house sold quickly. We lost track of who bought it, but Charlotte heard rumors that the buyers lasted less than a year before reselling, convinced the property was unlucky. Every so often, I go digging online. On forums about Tennessee folklore and unexplained mysteries, I find stories nearly identical to ours. Floating orbs, silent humming, ground that never grows right. Some are more dramatic, ending with disappearances or transformations. Some are so similar, it is as if all these encounters spring from one unfathomable root. I am grown now, and logic says my childhood imagination must have filled in gaps, that the orbs were tricks of the light, the spiral a quirk of nature. But on uneasy nights, when sleep is a distant hope, I remember the cold blue glow and Charlotte's white face, the silence that fell on the woods like the world's breath had paused. I hear the low, insistent hum, feel my hand trembling in hers, and wonder, if we had stepped over the fence, followed the lights deeper, what would have become of us? Maybe there are places you're not supposed to visit after dark. Maybe there are questions you're not meant to ask and answers you are not meant to find. When I pass through Wartburg these days, I never look back at that field. I do not need to. The memory follows me wherever I go, a persistent shifting light at the edge of my mind, a light that pulses quietly, waiting in the dark. I was 27 years old in 2018 and had just moved to a small town outside Cookeville, Tennessee for a teaching job. I had graduated with my education degree 2 years earlier and had been substitute teaching in Nashville, barely making ends meet, when I saw the posting for a full-time position at a rural elementary school. The pay was decent, the cost of living was low, and I was tired of sharing a cramped apartment with 2 roommates who never cleaned. I took the job without visiting first, which in hindsight was my first mistake. The town itself was barely a town at all. One gas station, a Dollar General, a post office that was only open 3 days a week, and maybe 200 residents scattered across the surrounding hills. The school served children from 4 different communities, busing them in from all directions. I rented a small house at the end of a dirt road about 3 miles from the center of town, if you could even call it a center. The house was old but clean, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like old wood, and a front porch that sagged slightly in the middle. The landlord lived 2 counties over and told me I could call if anything broke, but otherwise I was on my own. My nearest neighbor lived in a trailer about 200 yards down the road. His name was Ethan, or at least that is what he told me to call him. I met him the day I moved in. He showed up while I was unloading boxes from my car, walking up the driveway with his hands in his pockets and a friendly smile on his face. He was probably in his early 30s, lean and sunburned, with close cropped hair and a way of looking at you that felt too direct. He offered to help me carry some of the heavier boxes inside, and I accepted because I was tired and did not want to make multiple trips. He seemed normal enough at first. He talked about the area, told me which roads flooded when it rained, warned me that cell service was spotty and I should keep a landline. He mentioned he worked odd hours, something to do with construction, and that if I ever needed anything, I should not hesitate to ask. I thanked him and tried to be polite without being too friendly. I had learned early in life that some men took friendliness as an invitation, and I wanted to establish boundaries from the beginning. For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. I focused on setting up my classroom, learning the names of my students, adjusting to the slower pace of rural life. The isolation did not bother me as much as I thought it would. After the constant noise of Nashville, the quiet felt almost luxurious. I would sit on my porch in the evenings with a book and a glass of wine, listening to the cicadas and watching the sun set behind the hills. Ethan kept to himself for the most part. I would see his truck coming and going at odd hours, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning before the sun was up. Occasionally, he would wave if we happened to be outside at the same time, but he did not try to start conversations or linger. I was grateful for that. I had enough to worry about with lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences without having to navigate an overly friendly neighbor. But then I started noticing things. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. Cars coming down our road at 2 or 3 in the morning, their headlights sweeping across my bedroom wall as they turned into his driveway. The sound of voices, low and urgent, followed by doors slamming. Once I heard what sounded like an argument, a woman's voice raised and angry, then silence. I told myself it was not my business. People had complicated lives, and just because something seemed strange to me did not mean it was actually wrong. Then one night in late September, I saw something that I could not dismiss. It was around midnight, and I had gotten up to get a glass of water. My kitchen window faced toward Ethan's property, and as I stood at the sink, I saw 2 figures in his driveway illuminated by the motion sensor light he had installed above his trailer. Ethan and another man, both of them struggling to carry something heavy between them. At first, I thought it was furniture, maybe a couch or a rolled-up mattress. But the way they were moving, the way the object sagged and bent in the middle made me realize it was not furniture at all. It was a large, rolled-up carpet, the kind that is thick and heavy and hard to maneuver. They were having trouble with it, stopping every few feet to adjust their grip. Eventually, they heaved it into the back of a pickup truck that I did not recognize. They covered it with a tarp, said something to each other that I could not hear, and then the other man drove away while Ethan went back inside his trailer. I stood at the sink for a long time after that, my heart beating too fast, my mind trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe he was just getting rid of an old carpet. Maybe he was helping a friend move. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild because I had been watching too many crime shows before bed. I convinced myself it was nothing and went back to sleep, though it took me a long time to quiet my thoughts. A few weeks passed without incident. I almost forgot about what I had seen. Then one afternoon, I was at the Dollar General picking up some groceries when I saw a missing person flyer taped to the window near the entrance. A young woman named Jessica Reynolds had disappeared from a town about 20 miles away. She was 24 years old, a waitress at a truck stop diner, last seen leaving work on a Friday night. The police were asking anyone with information to call a tip line. I stared at her picture for a long time, a smiling blonde woman with kind eyes, and felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. That night, I could not stop thinking about the carpet, about the way it had sagged in the middle like there was the weight inside it, about the furtive way Ethan and the other man had moved, checking over their shoulders, working quickly. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to tell myself I was being paranoid and judgmental, but the more I tried not to think about it, the more convinced I became that I had seen something terrible. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention to Ethan's comings and goings. I noticed that he seemed to have a lot of visitors, different cars and trucks pulling up at strange hours. Sometimes people would go inside his trailer. Sometimes they would just meet him in the driveway for a few minutes before leaving. None of it felt right, but I did not know what to do with my suspicions. Call the police and say what exactly? That my neighbor had helped someone move a carpet in the middle of the night. Then one evening in mid-October, everything changed. I had just gotten home from a long day at school and was sitting on my couch grading papers when I heard a knock at my back door. Not the front door where visitors normally came, but the back door that faced the woods behind my house. I froze, my pen hovering over a student's worksheet. No one ever came to my back door. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I got up slowly and walked to the door, my heart pounding. Through the small window, I could see Ethan standing on my back porch. He was not smiling. His expression was serious, almost grim. I opened the door, but kept the screen door latched between us. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. When he finally did, his voice was quiet and measured. He said he wanted to talk to me about something important. He said he had noticed me watching his place, that he had seen me looking out my window at night. He said he knew I had seen him and his friend with the carpet, and he wanted to make sure we understood each other. My mouth went dry. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told him I did not know what he was talking about, that I minded my own business and expected him to do the same. He shook his head slowly and said he hoped that was true because it would be better for both of us if I forgot about what I saw. He said things were complicated, that there were aspects of the situation I could not possibly understand, and that asking questions or making phone calls would be a very bad idea. He never raised his voice. He never made an overt threat, but the way he looked at me, the weight behind his words, made it clear what he was saying. Stay quiet, or there would be consequences. Then he told me to have a good evening, turned around and walked back down my driveway toward his property. I watched him go, my hands shaking, and then I locked both doors and closed all the curtains. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my bedroom with my cell phone in my hand, debating what to do. Every instinct I had told me to call the police, to report what I had seen and what Ethan had just said to me. But another part of me, the part that understood how vulnerable I was living, alone in the middle of nowhere, was terrified of what might happen if I did. What if the police did not believe me? What if they questioned Ethan and then left, and I was still there, still alone, with a neighbor who now knew I had tried to turn him in? The next morning, I drove to school in a daze. I taught my classes on autopilot, barely registering what my students were saying. During my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called the non-emergency police number. I told them about the carpet, about the missing woman whose flyer I'd seen, about the conversation Ethan had had with me the night before. The dispatcher took down all my information and said an officer would be in touch. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy came to my house. He was polite and professional, asking me to go through everything again in detail. I told him about the late-night visitors, the carpet, the veiled threat. He wrote it all down in a notebook and said they would look into it. He warned me to be careful, to keep my doors locked, to call immediately if Ethan approached me again or if I saw anything else suspicious. Over the next week, I noticed increased police presence on our road. Patrol cars driving by slowly, sometimes stopping to sit at the end of the driveway for a few minutes before moving on. I felt simultaneously safer and more exposed, knowing that Ethan would surely notice the police activity and might connect it to me. Then one morning, I woke up to the sound of vehicles and voices outside. I looked out my window to see multiple police cars and a white van parked in front of Ethan's trailer. Officers in tactical gear were everywhere, some standing guard, others going in and out of the property. I watched as they carried out boxes and bags, taking photographs, marking off areas with yellow tape. Later that day, one of the deputies came to my door to inform me that they had executed a search warrant based on my tip and several other complaints they had received. They found evidence linking Ethan to a trafficking operation that had been operating across 3 counties. The property was being used as a temporary holding location, a place where people were kept for short periods before being moved elsewhere. They found documentation, supplies, and other materials that connected Ethan and his associates to multiple victims, including Jessica Reynolds, whose body had been found in a wooded area about 40 miles away. The deputy told me that my report had been crucial in building their case, that without it they might not have had enough cause to investigate. He thanked me for my bravery in coming forward, but I did not feel brave. I felt sick and guilty and scared of how close I had been to something so evil. Guilty that I had hesitated, that I had let my fear nearly keep me silent. Ethan was arrested along with 4 other people connected to the operation. The case went to trial, and I had to testify about what I had seen that night with the carpet and about the conversation we had on my back porch. Sitting in that courtroom, looking at Ethan across the room, I felt the weight of everything that had almost been left buried and hidden. He was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The other defendants received similar sentences. The prosecutor told me afterward that the evidence they had recovered from Ethan's property had helped them identify and locate several other victims who might never have been found otherwise. I moved back to Nashville within a month of the trial ending. I could not stay in that house, on that road, knowing what had been happening just 200 yards away. I took a position at a school in the suburbs where I would never be more than a few minutes from other people, from light and noise and witnesses. Sometimes I still think about that night, about the carpet, and the two men struggling under the motion sensor light. I think about how easy it would have been to look away, to convince myself it was none of my business, to let fear silence me. And I think about the people who were saved because I did not, but mostly I think about Jessica Reynolds, about the waitress whose face I saw on that flyer, and I wonder if speaking up sooner might have changed her outcome. That question haunts me more than anything else. The terrible arithmetic of timing and courage, and the lives that hang in the balance when good people choose silence over risk. I have been hunting in the woods around Copper Hill, Tennessee since I was 12 years old, and I am 31 now. My father taught me everything about tracking, about reading signs in the forest, about respecting the land and the creatures that live there. We spent countless weekends together in those woods, walking the same trails, sitting in the same tree stands, learning the rhythm of the seasons and the habits of deer and turkey and everything else that moved through the shadows between the pines. When he passed away 5 years ago, those woods became even more important to me. They were the place where I felt closest to him, where his voice still echoed in my memory, teaching me patience and stillness. I thought I knew every inch of that forest, every hollow, every ridge, every creek bed that ran full in spring and went dry by August. I'd never believed in cryptids or folklore or any of the strange stories that mountain people sometimes told around fires. I believed in what I could see and touch and track, in the physical world that made sense according to rules I understood. But what I saw 3 years ago in 2022 made me question everything I thought I knew about those woods and what might be living in them alongside the deer and the coyotes. It was early November, the best time of year for hunting. The leaves had fallen, and you could see farther through the trees, could spot movement at a distance. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible but does not cut through your jacket. I had driven out before dawn, parked my truck at the usual spot off the forestry road, and hiked in about 2 miles to an area I knew well. There was a ridge that overlooked a small valley with a creek running through it, and deer would come down in the morning to drink. I had taken 3 bucks from that spot over the years. I settled into position just as the sky was starting to lighten, that gray pre-dawn time when the world is neither dark nor light. I had my rifle across my lap, my thermos of coffee beside me, and I was prepared to wait as long as it took. Hunting is mostly waiting, mostly silence and patience, and letting the forest forget you were there. I was good at waiting. I had learned from the best. The morning was quiet at first. I heard the usual sounds, a woodpecker hammering at a dead tree somewhere to my left, the rustle of squirrels in the leaf litter, the distant call of a crow. The mist was thick in the valley below, hanging low over the water like a blanket. As the sun rose higher, it started to burn off, revealing the creek and the rocky banks on either side. That was when I first heard the other sound. Something large moving through the brush on the far side of the valley, maybe 100 yards away. The movement was heavy and deliberate, branches snapping under weight. The kind of sound a big animal makes when it does not care about being quiet. My first thought was bear, though bears were not common in that area and should have been getting ready to hibernate anyway. but the sound was wrong for a bear. Bears move with a kind of shuffling gait, their four legs hitting the ground in a distinct rhythm. This sounded like something walking on two legs. I raised my binoculars and scanned the tree line across the creek. The mist had mostly cleared, but the shadows were still deep under the canopy. I could not see anything moving, but I could still hear it. That steady two-legged walk getting closer to the water. I lowered the binoculars and waited, my heart beating a little faster now, my hands gripping the rifle more tightly. Then I saw it emerge from the trees. At first, my brain tried to make sense of what I was looking at, tried to fit it into a category I understood. A man, I thought. Someone else hunting these woods. But as it stepped into the open, I realized it was not a man at all. It was too tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, but long coarse hair that hung in matted clumps. Its shoulders were massive, its arms too long in proportion to its body. It walked upright, but with a slight forward lean, its knees bent in a way that looked almost awkward. I stopped breathing. My entire body went rigid as I watched this thing walk down to the creek and crouch at the water's edge. It dipped its hands, they were hands, not paws, into the water and brought them to its mouth to drink. The morning sun was fully up now, and I could see it clearly. Could see the way its muscles moved under the hair. Could see the shape of its head, which was too large and too forward-thrusting to be human. I do not know how long I sat there watching it. Time seemed to have stopped working properly. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. The creature finished drinking and stood up to its full height. That was when it turned and looked directly at me. We made eye contact across the 100 yards that separated us. Its eyes were dark and intelligent and completely aware. This was not an animal operating on instinct. This was something that understood it was being watched, that recognized me as another thinking being. We stared at each other, and I felt something I had never felt before in those woods, a primal terror that went deeper than rational thought, that came from some ancient part of my brain that remembered when humans were not the apex predator. I had my rifle in my hands. I could have raised it, could have taken a shot. I am a good marksman, and at that distance I would not have missed. But something stopped me. Some instinct that told me this was not a deer or a turkey, not something that existed within the normal boundaries of hunting and seasons and game laws. This was something else entirely, something that did not fit into any framework I had for understanding the world. The creature watched me for what felt like forever. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound. It started as a low rumble that I could feel in my chest even from that distance. And then it rose into something between a howl and a roar, a sound that made every bird in the forest go silent, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my hands started shaking. Then it turned and walked back into the trees, not running, but moving with purpose, crashing through the undergrowth and disappearing into the shadows. The sound of its passage faded gradually until the forest was silent again, except for my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I sat there for another 20 minutes, unable to move, unable to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to follow it, to track it the way my father had taught me to track everything else. But a larger part, the part that was still shaking, knew that would be a terrible mistake. Whatever that thing was, it had given me a warning. That sound had been a message, clear as words. You are in my territory now. Leave. Eventually, I gathered my gear and made my way back to my truck. I did not take the direct route. I circled wide, keeping to the open areas, checking behind me constantly. The 2-mile hike back felt like 10 miles. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding something. Every sound made me jump. When I got back to town, I stopped at a diner and ordered coffee just to be around people, to remind myself that civilization still existed. My hands were still shaking as I lifted the cup to my lips. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I told her I was fine. just cold from being out in the woods so early. I did not know how to explain what I'd seen. I barely believed it myself. Later that day, I did what I should have done years ago. I went to the library and started researching. I learned about the Tennessee wild man, a creature that had been spotted in the area for generations, reports going back to the 1800s, stories from Cherokee oral tradition that went back even further. Sightings described exactly what I had seen: the height, the hair, the way it moved. I found online forums where people shared their encounters, dozens of them, all eerily similar to mine. I also learned that most scientists dismiss these reports as misidentifications or hoaxes. Bears standing on their hind legs, they said. People in costumes. Mass hallucination. But I knew what I had seen. I knew the difference between a bear and what had been standing by that creek. And I knew that whatever it was real, and it was out there in those woods where I had been hunting my entire life. I have not gone back to that area since then. I still hunt, but I choose different locations, places that feel safer somehow, though I know that is probably an illusion. I never hunt alone anymore. I bring my brother-in-law or one of my cousins, and I never stay past mid-morning. I tell people it is because I am getting older, that I do not have the patience for all-day hunts anymore. But the truth is I am afraid of what I might see if I stay too long, of what might be watching me from the shadows between the trees. Sometimes I think about my father, about all those years we spent in those woods together. I wonder if he ever saw anything like what I saw. If he did, he never told me about it. Maybe he was protecting me, or maybe he thought I would not believe him. I understand that impulse now. Even though I know what I experienced was real, there is a part of me that wants to pretend it was not, that wants to file it away under stress or fatigue, or too much coffee on an empty stomach. But I cannot. The memory is too clear, too vivid. I can still see those dark eyes looking at me across the water, can still hear that sound rumbling up from deep in its chest, can still feel that ancient fear that made my hands shake and my legs want to run. Whatever the Tennessee wild man is, whether it is some undiscovered species or something else entirely, I know it exists. I know it lives in those woods. And I know I was lucky that day that it chose to warn me instead of something worse. I have told this story to a handful of people over the past 3 years. Most of them humor me, but I can see the doubt in their eyes. They think I saw a bear, or that my imagination got the better of me. That is okay. I do not need them to believe me. But if you ever find yourself hunting in the woods around Copper Hill, if you ever hear something moving through the trees with a two-legged gait, if you ever see something that is too tall and too broad to be human, I want you to remember my story, and I want you to turn around and walk away. Do not try to get a closer look. Do not try to track it. Just leave. Some mysteries are better left alone. Some territories are not meant for us to enter. The woods have been here longer than we have, and they will be here long after we are gone. And there are things living in them that we were never meant to understand. In 2020, during lockdown, I was 23 years old and dealing with severe anxiety and isolation, living alone in a rental house in Greenville, Tennessee. The world had turned strange and frightening in ways none of us could have predicted, and being cut off from friends and family, working from home in complete solitude, began to wear away at my mental health in ways I did not recognize until it was almost too late. What started as my mind playing tricks on me turned into something I still cannot fully explain, something that sits in the gray space between paranoia and reality, and the not knowing which it was haunts me more than anything else. I had moved to Greenville 6 months before the pandemic hit, taking a job as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm. The house I rented was old, built sometime in the 40s, with creaking floors and drafty windows, and all the character that comes with age. Under normal circumstances, I would have loved it. But when lockdown started and I found myself working from my kitchen table, never leaving except for groceries, never seeing another human face except through a screen, the house began to feel less like a charming old home and more like a prison. The isolation got to me quickly. I've always been prone to anxiety, but I had managed it well enough with therapy and medication and a social life that kept me connected to the world. All of that disappeared overnight. My therapist switched to video calls that felt hollow and unsatisfying. My medication ran low, and getting refills became complicated. My friends were all dealing with their own fears, and we drifted apart. Our group chats going quiet, our video calls becoming less frequent until they stopped altogether. I started sleeping badly. My schedule fell apart completely. I would work until 3 in the morning and then sleep until noon, waking up disoriented and exhausted. The house felt different at night, more oppressive, the shadows deeper and more threatening. Old houses make noises, I told myself. Pipes expanding and contracting, wood settling, wind rattling the windows. Normal things. Nothing to be afraid of. But then I started hearing the footsteps. They would come around 2 or 3 in the morning, always from upstairs, always the same slow measured pace. The house only had 1 floor, but there was an attic accessible through a panel in the hallway ceiling. I had looked up there once when I first moved in, shining a flashlight into the dusty space and seeing nothing but old insulation and rafters. I assumed the footsteps were just the house settling in some way I did not understand, the sound traveling through the walls and playing tricks on my tired brain. I kept a log for a week, writing down every time I heard the sounds. They happened every single night at exactly 2:47 in the morning. The consistency bothered me more than the sounds themselves. Random settling would not be so precise, so rhythmic, but what else could it be? I was alone in the house. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. There was no one there. Things started going missing or appearing in different places. My car keys would be on the kitchen counter when I was certain I had left them on my desk. A coffee mug I used in the morning would be sitting in the bathroom sink in the afternoon. My phone would be in the bedroom when I remembered leaving it in the living room. I told myself I was just forgetful, that the stress and lack of sleep were making me careless. My doctor increased my anxiety medication when I called to describe my symptoms. Brain fog, she called it, a common side effect of isolation and depression. The footsteps continued every night. I started dreading 2:47, watching the clock, waiting for them to start. And they always did. Right on time, that slow, deliberate pacing from directly above my head. I would sit frozen in my bed, listening, counting the steps. 12 steps from one end of the attic to the other, a pause, then 12 steps back. Over and over for about 20 minutes, then silence. One night, I decided I had to confront it, had to prove to myself that there was nothing there, that my mind was creating meaning where there was none. When the footsteps started, I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and went to the hallway. The attic panel was a simple square of wood that lifted up and slid aside. I dragged a chair over and climbed up, my hand shaking as I pushed the panel open. I shone my light into the attic, sweeping the beam across the space. Dust motes danced in the light. The rafters cast long shadows. Everything looked exactly as it had the first time I checked. Empty, undisturbed. The footsteps had stopped the moment I opened the panel. I climbed down, replaced the panel, and went back to bed, but sleep would not come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. The footsteps started again 10 minutes later. Same rhythm, same pace, same 12 steps each way. I screamed at the ceiling, screamed for whatever it was to stop, to leave me alone. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like being underwater. Then, slowly, deliberately, I heard the footsteps start again. But this time they were not pacing back and forth. They were moving toward the attic panel. They were coming to the stairs. I heard each step as whatever it was descended. Heard the creak of wood that should not be there because there were no stairs in the attic. The sounds reached the hallway, stopped. I could hear breathing, slow and deep, just outside my bedroom door. I pulled the blankets over my head like a child, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. The footsteps retreated back down the hall and back up into the attic. I called 911. I was sobbing, barely coherent, trying to explain that someone was in my house, in my attic, that I could hear them walking around. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me until 2 officers arrived. They searched the entire house, the attic, every room, every closet. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been there. One officer suggested I might be hearing animals, raccoons, or possums that had gotten into the attic space, but he admitted the footsteps I described did not sound like animals. After they left, I sat in my living room, with all the lights on until dawn. I was too afraid to sleep, too afraid to be in the dark. When my landlord called the next day to check in, the police had contacted her. I told her about the sounds. She said the house had been empty for 2 years before I moved in, and that the previous tenant had left suddenly without explanation. She did not know why. That information should have comforted me, but instead, it made everything worse. Over the next few days, I barely slept. I existed in a fog of exhaustion and fear. The footsteps continued every night, always at 2:47, and now sometimes during the day as well. I would be working at my kitchen table and hear them start up, hear that slow pacing directly above me. I stopped using certain rooms. I avoided the hallway. I spent most of my time in the living room near the front door, ready to run if I needed to. My parents called and I broke down, telling them everything. They wanted me to come stay with them, but they lived 3 states away and I was afraid to travel during the pandemic, afraid of getting sick or getting them sick. They convinced me to call my doctor again. Another medication adjustment, more reassurances that anxiety can manifest in strange ways, that isolation does strange things to the mind. But I knew what I was hearing. I knew it was real. Then one morning I found something that changed everything. I was getting dressed when I noticed my bedroom closet door was slightly open. I always kept it closed. Inside, pushed into the back corner behind my hanging clothes, I found a small pile of items: food wrappers, empty water bottles, a pillow, a blanket, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of me taken through the windows of my house. Me sitting at my kitchen table working. Me on the couch watching TV. Me walking from my car to the front door. The photos had been taken over weeks, maybe months. I ran out of the house and called 911 from my car. This time when the police came, they did a more thorough search. They found the access point, a loose board on the side of the house near the attic vent that someone had pried open and then carefully replaced. They found more evidence in the attic, a space between the rafters where someone had been living, where they had hollowed out the insulation to create a hiding spot. They found more photos, more trash, notebooks with pages of writing about me, about my schedule, about what I did each day. The police set up a perimeter and waited. Hours passed. Then, late that afternoon, they saw someone approaching the house. A man in his 30s, thin and disheveled, carrying a bag of food from a convenience store. They arrested him as he tried to enter through the loose board. His name was Michael something. I never learned his last name. He had been squatting in my attic for months, since before the lockdown started, watching me through cracks in the ceiling, coming down when I was asleep or out of the house. They told me he had a history of breaking into homes and living in attics or basements, watching the occupants. He had done it in 3 other states before coming to Tennessee. He would stay for weeks or months until something spooked him or he got bored, and then he would move on. He had never physically harmed anyone, they said, as if that made it better. He just watched. He just lived in the walls and ceilings and spaces between. A ghost made flesh. I moved out that day. I threw most of my belongings in my car and drove to a hotel. I never went back to that house. My landlord was understanding, breaking the lease without penalty. My parents drove down to help me pack the rest of my things, and we hired movers to do the actual work because I could not bring myself to enter that house again. I spent a year in therapy trying to process what had happened, trying to separate the paranoia I had felt from the real threat that had been there all along. My therapist helped me understand that my anxiety had not been unfounded, that some part of me had known something was wrong, even when everyone kept telling me I was just stressed and isolated. My instincts had been correct. But that knowledge did not make me feel safer. If anything, it made me trust myself less, made me question every feeling, every fear. The worst part is not knowing which experiences were real and which were symptoms of my deteriorating mental state. Were the moved objects really Michael coming down and rearranging things, or was I just forgetting where I put them? Were the breathing sounds outside my door real or imagined? Did he actually come into my room while I slept, or did I dream it? The police could not tell me. Michael refused to answer questions beyond his basic information. He was convicted of trespassing and stalking and sentenced to 2 years, which seemed like nothing for what he had put me through. I still have nightmares about those months. I dream that I am back in that house, hearing footsteps above me, knowing someone is there but being unable to leave, unable to wake up. I dream that I open my closet and find him standing there, watching me with empty eyes. I wake up gasping, checking every corner of my room, checking the locks on my doors and windows. I moved back in with my parents after everything happened. At 26, I am living in my childhood bedroom, working remotely for a different company, still trying to rebuild my sense of safety in the world. I check every attic, every crawl space, every possible hiding place in any building I enter. I cannot be in old houses anymore. The creaking, the settling sounds, they send me into panic attacks. My friends do not understand. They think I should be over it by now, that it has been long enough. But you do not get over something like that. It becomes part of you, a permanent shadow that follows you everywhere you go. Sometimes I wonder about Michael, about where he is now, whether he is out there doing the same thing to someone else. I wonder how many people have lived with footsteps in their attics, with things moving in the night, and convinced themselves it was nothing, just their imagination, just stress. I wonder how many people are being watched right now and do not know it. The line between paranoia and intuition is thinner than we like to think, and sometimes the scariest monsters are not the supernatural ones, but the human ones, the ones that look like everyone else, that walk among us unseen, that know how to exist in the spaces we do not think to check. Those are the monsters that truly haunt me, because I know they are real, and I know they are everywhere. When I was 17 in 2016, my friends and I decided to test out the local legend about Crybaby Bridge, just outside Rogersville, Tennessee, on Halloween night. We thought it was just a stupid story to scare kids, the kind of tale you hear whispered at sleepovers, and repeated at campfires until it becomes part of the town's identity. Everyone in Rogersville knew about Crybaby Bridge, but nobody I knew had actually gone there at midnight on Halloween to see if the legend was true. We were young and bored and convinced we were too smart to be frightened by ghost stories. We were wrong about all of those things. The legend itself was simple enough, and every small town in the South seems to have a version of it. Sometime in the 1920s, according to the story, a woman had thrown her baby off the bridge into the creek below. The reasons varied depending on who was telling it. Some said she was poor and desperate. Others said she was unmarried and ashamed. A few versions claimed she was driven mad by grief after her husband died. The details shifted, but the core remained the same. A mother, a bridge, a baby in the water, and a lifetime of regret that transformed into something darker. If you went to the bridge at midnight, the story went, and called out the right words, You would hear the baby crying from beneath the bridge. Some people claim to have seen the woman herself, dressed in white, walking along the creek bank searching for what she had lost. A few swore they had seen ghostly handprints appear on their car windows, small prints like a child reaching out. Most people dismissed it as nonsense, but enough locals believed it that the bridge had developed a reputation. Kids avoided it after dark. Even adults tended to take the long way around rather than drive across it late at night. There were 6 of us that Halloween, me and my best friend Lily, plus 4 others from our high school. We told our parents we were going to a Halloween party at someone's house, and technically we were, but we planned to make a stop at the bridge first. We piled into 2 cars around 11 at night, giddy with anticipation and trying to one-up each other with scary stories we had heard about the bridge. Lily sat next to me in the back seat, and I remember she kept checking her phone, texting someone, seeming distracted. I asked if she was nervous, and she said no, but her voice was tight and unconvincing. The bridge was about 15 minutes outside of town, down a series of increasingly rural roads that took us past farmhouses and fields, and finally into a stretch of woods where the streetlights disappeared, and our headlights became the only source of illumination. The bridge itself was old, built from steel and concrete that had weathered decades of Tennessee summers and winters. It spanned a creek that was barely more than a stream, maybe 20 feet across, shallow enough that you could see the rocks at the bottom during the day. At night, it was just a black ribbon of water reflecting the moon. We parked both cars about 50 yards from the bridge, off the road in a small clearing between the trees. The plan was to walk to the bridge together, wait until midnight, and then perform the ritual. One of us would stand in the middle of the bridge and call out the words, "Come back, I'm sorry." Then we would wait and listen. If nothing happened, we would laugh about it and go to the party. If something did happen, well, that would be a better story. The walk to the bridge felt longer than 50 yards. The woods pressed in close on both sides of the road, and the darkness between the trees seemed absolute, like you could walk in there and never find your way back out. We joked and laughed, but the sounds felt forced, too loud, like we were trying to convince ourselves we were not afraid. Lily stayed close to me, her shoulder brushing against mine as we walked. I could feel her tension, the way her breathing had gone shallow and quick. We reached the bridge at 11:48. Someone checked their phone and announced the time, and we settled in to wait. The bridge had low concrete barriers on either side, and we leaned against them, passing around a flask someone had brought, trying to stay warm. October nights in Tennessee can get cold, and none of us had dressed properly. We were all wearing costumes, or parts of costumes, inadequate jackets, thin shirts. I remember shivering and watching my breath turn to mist in the air. As midnight approached, the joking stopped. We all felt it. A shift in the atmosphere, like the air itself had grown heavier. The woods around us had gone silent. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing. Just the soft sound of water moving beneath us and our own breathing. Someone suggested we call it off, that maybe this was a bad idea, but the rest of us shouted them down. We had come this far. We were not leaving without finishing what we started. At exactly midnight, I volunteered to do it. I do not know why I stepped forward, some impulse to prove myself, to show I was braver than I felt. I walked to the center of the bridge and stood there, my friends gathered in a semicircle behind me. I took a breath and called out into the darkness, "Come back, I'm sorry." My voice sounded small and strange, swallowed almost immediately by the night. Nothing happened. The silence continued, complete and oppressive. One of my friends laughed, a nervous sound, and said we should try again. So I did. I called out louder this time, putting more force into the words. "Come back, I'm sorry." And this time, something answered. A faint crying sound, so quiet I almost missed it coming from underneath the bridge. We all froze. The crying grew louder, a baby's wail, high-pitched and desperate, echoing off the water and the concrete. It was not a recording or a trick of the wind. It was unmistakable. Lily grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin even through my jacket. She was shaking, her face white in the moonlight. The crying continued, rising and falling, sometimes seeming to come from one side of the creek, sometimes from the other, like whatever was making the sound was moving around beneath us. Someone said we should leave, that we needed to go right now, but none of us moved. We were frozen in place, caught between terror and disbelief. Then Lily walked to the edge of the bridge. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, leaning over the concrete barrier to shine the beam down into the creek below. I shouted at her to stop, to get back, but she ignored me. She stood there for a long moment, the light from her phone illuminating the water and the rocks and the darkness beneath the bridge. Then she screamed. It was a sound I had never heard her make before, pure and absolute terror. She stumbled backward, dropping her phone, and it fell into the creek below with a splash that seemed impossibly loud. She said she saw a face looking up at her from the water. A pale white face with empty eyes and an open mouth just beneath the surface, reaching up toward her. The crying sound intensified, becoming almost deafening, coming from all around us now instead of just from below. And then we saw her, the woman in white. She was standing at the end of the bridge, maybe 30 feet away, just at the edge where the road met the bridge. She was facing us, perfectly still, her white dress glowing in the moonlight. Her hair hung long and dark around her face, but we could not see her features, just a blur where her face should have been. We ran, all of us at once, no discussion, just pure instinct. We scattered like animals, some running toward the cars, others heading into the woods. I grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her with me, running faster than I had ever run in my life. Behind us, I could hear footsteps, fast and light, gaining on us. I did not look back. Looking back seemed like the worst thing I could possibly do. Lily was crying, gasping for breath, but she kept running. We reached my car and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. The car would not start. I turned the key and the engine turned over once, twice, but would not catch. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear Lily sobbing next to me, saying, "Please, please, please," over and over like a prayer. I turned the key again, and this time the engine roared to life. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the clearing so fast we almost hit a tree. The headlights swept across the road, and I saw her standing there in the middle of the street, the woman in white, closer than she had any right to be. She had covered half the distance between the bridge and our cars in seconds, and now she was running toward us, her white dress streaming behind her, moving impossibly fast. I shifted into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires spun on the dirt for a moment before catching, and we shot forward onto the road. In the rearview mirror, I could see her still running, getting smaller but not stopping, not slowing. I drove without speaking, without thinking, just putting distance between us and that bridge. Lily was curled up in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth. When we were about 5 miles away, I finally pulled over on the side of the highway and put my hazard lights on. My whole body was shaking. Lily looked at me with wide eyes and asked me if I had seen her. I said yes. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes before the other car pulled up behind us. Our 4 friends climbed out, all of them looking as shaken as we felt. One of them had a scratch on his face from running through the woods. Another had lost her shoes somewhere. We drove directly to the police station in Rogersville. None of us wanted to go home. None of us wanted to be alone, and we needed to tell someone what had happened. The officers on duty listened to our story with expressions that shifted from concern to skeptical to something like resigned irritation. They said kids came in every Halloween with stories about Crybaby Bridge, that it was a local tradition, that we were probably just seeing things or pranking each other. But one older officer, a man with gray hair and tired eyes, pulled me aside as we were leaving. He told me they had responded to multiple accidents at that bridge over the years. People who claimed they swerved to avoid a woman standing in the road. He said whatever was there, it had been there longer than the legend, that the story about the woman and the baby was probably built around something older that no one understood anymore. He told me not to go back there, especially not at night. I promised him I would not. I'm 26 now, and I have kept that promise. I have never gone back to that bridge, not even in daylight. I moved away from Rogersville for college and settled in Knoxville afterward. But sometimes, when I visit my parents, I have to drive past the road that leads to the bridge. I always look straight ahead, never turning my head, never acknowledging it is there. Lily still lives in Rogersville, and we stay in touch through social media, but we have never talked about that night. It sits between us like a wall, something too big and too frightening to examine. Sometimes I search online for information about the bridge, about the legend, about any historical truth behind the story. I find variations of the tale from a dozen different sources, some claiming the woman's name was Sarah, others saying it was Elizabeth or Mary. I find reports of sightings going back decades, people who swear they have seen the woman in white or heard the crying baby. Some accounts match what we experienced. Others are wilder, stranger, more elaborate. I do not know what to make of any of it. I do not know if what we saw was a ghost or something else, if the crying we heard was a baby or just the creek playing tricks with sound, if the woman was real or a mass hallucination born from fear and expectation. What I do know is that 6 people saw the same thing that night. 6 people heard the same sounds, felt the same terror, ran from the same figure in white. Whatever it was not a joke or a prank or a trick of the light. It was real enough to make us run, real enough to follow us, real enough that I can still see her sometimes when I close my eyes. That pale figure standing in the road with darkness where her face should be. The legend says the woman is searching for her lost child, that she walks the bridge and the creek bank calling out, unable to find peace. But when I think about what we saw, I do not think she was searching. I think she was guarding something, protecting the bridge from people like us who came to mock and test and disbelieve. I think we trespassed on territory that was not meant for the living, that we called out to something that should have been left alone, and it answered in the only way it knew how. Every Halloween I see posts on social media from kids back home talking about going to Crybaby Bridge, about testing the legend, about proving ghosts are not real. I want to comment, to warn them, to tell them not to go. But I know they would not listen. We did not listen to the warnings either. And maybe that is how these things perpetuate, how legends stay alive. Each generation has to learn for themselves that some stories are true, some places are haunted, and some mysteries are better left alone. If you are ever in Rogersville, Tennessee, and someone suggests visiting Crybaby Bridge at midnight, do me a favor. Say no. Go to the party instead. Stay in the light, stay with your friends, stay away from old bridges and dark water, and legends that have persisted for 100 years. Because I promise you, whether you believe in ghosts or not, there are some things in this world that defy explanation. And once you have seen them, once you have looked into that darkness and felt it looking back, you can never unsee it. That knowledge becomes part of you, a weight you carry, a shadow that never quite leaves. And trust me when I tell you, it is not worth it. It is never worth it. In the fall of 2019, my younger sister Lily, who was 16 at the time, went missing for 18 hours in Monteagle, Tennessee. And when she came back, she could not remember a single thing about where she had been. What happened during those hours remains a mystery that haunts our family to this day, a gap in time that defies explanation and has left scars that are invisible but permanent. I was 19 then, home from my first semester at college, and what should have been an ordinary Tuesday afternoon became the longest night of my life. Lily was a sophomore in high school, a good student, a careful kid who never got into trouble. She took the same bus home every day, got off at the same stop at the corner of Main and Elm, and walked the half-mile to our house through the safe, quiet streets of Monteagle. Our town is small, maybe 1,500 people, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing bad ever happens. The most exciting thing that had occurred all year was when the high school football team made it to regionals. We thought we were safe. We thought our children were protected by the simple virtue of living in a place too small and too insignificant for anything terrible to touch. That Tuesday, I had driven to Chattanooga to visit a friend and do some shopping. I got home around 4:30, expecting to find Lily in her room doing homework or watching videos on her phone. But the house was empty. Her backpack was not by the door where she always dropped it. Her shoes were not in the hallway. I called out for her and got only silence in response. I checked my phone to see if she had texted me about going to a friend's house, but there was nothing. I called my mom at work. She said Lily had texted her earlier to say she was taking the bus home as usual and would be there by 3:45. Mom had assumed everything was fine and had not checked back. I told her Lily was not home, and Mom said to give it another hour, that maybe she had stayed after school for something and forgotten to mention it. But a cold feeling had already settled in my stomach, an instinct that something was very wrong. At 5:30, my mom came home and we started making calls. We called Lily's friends, her teachers, the school office. Nobody had seen her since the bus dropped her off. The bus driver remembered her getting off at the usual stop, said she had been alone, that she had walked toward home like she always did. We drove the route she would have taken, looking for any sign of her, any clue about where she might have gone. Nothing. It was like she had vanished into thin air. By 6, we called the police. They took our report seriously despite the fact that Lily had only been missing for a few hours. In a town as small as Monteagle, a missing teenager was immediate cause for concern. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen her. They checked security camera footage from the few businesses along her, wrote home. The Dollar General camera showed her walking past at 3:52, heading in the right direction. After that, nothing. They found footage from a residence showing Lily walking down Pine Street at 3:57, just 2 blocks from our house. Then at 4:01, different footage showed her turning down a side street she never normally took, heading toward the old railroad tracks that ran along the edge of town. That was the last anyone saw of her. The police brought in search dogs that evening, and the dogs tracked her scent to the railroad tracks and then lost it completely, as if she had simply ceased to exist at that spot. The next 18 hours were a nightmare. Police searched the woods along the tracks, the abandoned buildings nearby, every place a teenager might go or might be taken. Volunteers from town formed search parties. My mom was inconsolable. My dad was on the phone, constantly coordinating with police and calling anyone who might have information. I drove around town until 3 in the morning, looking in places we had already looked, unable to sleep, unable to stop moving. Every time my phone rang, I would grab it desperately, hoping for news, but it was always someone else calling to ask if we had found her. The worst part was not knowing if she had run away, if she had been taken, if she was hurt, if she was scared, not knowing if we would ever see her again. The statistics ran through my head on an endless loop, all the terrible things I'd read about missing teenagers, about the first 48 hours being critical, about how the odds dropped with every passing minute. I prayed harder than I had ever prayed in my life, made bargains with God, promised anything if Lily could just come home safe. Then at 10:30 the next morning, almost exactly 18 hours after she had disappeared, we got the call. Lily had been found. She was alive, unhurt, walking through the parking lot of a grocery store in Winchester, 30 miles away from Monteagle. A store employee had noticed her and thought she looked lost, had asked if she needed help. Lily had not been able to tell him where she was or how she had gotten there. The employee called the police, and they ran her information and realized she was the missing girl from Monteagle. My parents and I drove to Winchester in record time. When we got to the police station where they were holding her, Lily was sitting in a chair wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. She was still wearing her school clothes, the same jeans and hoodie she had worn that morning. When she saw us, she started crying, and so did we. My mom hugged her so tightly I thought she might break her. My dad kept saying, thank God, over and over like a mantra. But as the relief began to fade, we realized something was very wrong. Lily could not explain what had happened. She remembered getting off the bus, remembered starting to walk home, and then nothing. Her next memory was standing in the grocery store parking lot in Winchester with no idea how she had gotten there. 18 hours had simply vanished from her mind, erased as completely as if they had never happened. The police questioned her gently but thoroughly. They asked if anyone had approached her, if she'd gotten into a car, if she'd been hurt or touched inappropriately. Lily had no answers. She did not remember turning down the side street toward the tracks. She did not remember walking there or being taken there. She had no memory of the entire night or the next morning. The last thing she recalled was it being afternoon, and then suddenly it was the next day, and she was 30 miles away. They took her to the hospital in Winchester for a full examination. The doctors found no signs of physical trauma, no evidence of sexual assault, no drugs in her system. She had some scratches on her arms and legs that looked like they came from bushes or branches, but nothing serious. Her clothes were dirty, but not torn. She was dehydrated and hungry, but otherwise physically fine. Psychologically, however, was a different story. The doctors could not explain the memory loss. They said it might be dissociative amnesia caused by trauma, a psychological response where the brain blocks out experiences too terrible to process. But if something traumatic had happened, there should have been physical evidence, and there was none. They suggested she might have had a seizure or some kind of neurological event, but tests showed normal brain function. They were baffled, and so were we. Over the following days and weeks, Lily saw multiple specialists, psychiatrists, neurologists, trauma counselors. Everyone had theories, but no one had answers. The police investigated every possibility. They looked into human trafficking, though Lily did not fit the typical pattern and had been released or escaped in a way that made no sense. They considered abduction, but again, the lack of physical evidence was puzzling. They explored the idea that she had run away voluntarily and was lying about the memory loss, but Lily was adamant that she was telling the truth, and I believed her. You cannot fake the kind of confusion and fear I saw in her eyes. The strangest part was what Lily began to say as the days passed. She said she almost remembered something, like a dream that fades when you try to hold on to it. She said she heard music, or maybe singing, something beautiful that made her want to follow it. She said there were voices, but she could not understand the words, and colors that did not look like any colors she had seen before. The therapist suggested these might be false memories, her brain trying to fill in the gaps with imagination, but Lily insisted they felt real, more real than dreams, like something that had actually happened to her. Then we learned something that made everything more disturbing. The police told us there had been 3 other similar cases in the region over the past 5 years. A teenager in Sewanee, another in Tracy City, and one in Altamont. All between the ages of 15 and 17. All had disappeared for periods ranging from 12 to 24 hours. All had been found confused and disoriented with no memory of what had happened to them. All had been examined and shown no signs of trauma or drugs, and all of them, when pressed, had mentioned hearing music or singing before their memories went blank. The cases were never solved. The police had investigated each one thoroughly, but found no connections, no suspects, no explanation. The prevailing theory was that there was someone or a group of people drugging teenagers with something that left no trace in standard toxicology screens, though that did not explain the consistent distance the victims traveled or how they were released without anyone seeing. Some officers privately wondered if there was something else going on, something that did not fit into normal investigative frameworks. But officially, the cases remained open and unsolved. Lily tried to go back to school, but she could not focus. She had nightmares every night, waking up crying and saying she heard the singing again. She became afraid to be alone, afraid to walk anywhere by herself. The confident, happy girl she had been before disappeared, replaced by someone anxious and haunted. She started seeing a therapist twice a week, and slowly, very slowly, she began to function again. But she was never quite the same. There was always a shadow behind her eyes. A distance, like part of her, was still lost in those 18 missing hours. My parents became overprotective to the point of suffocation. They drove Lily everywhere, never let her out of their sight, installed security cameras around our house. I understood why, but I also saw how it was affecting Lily, how she felt trapped and watched and unable to reclaim any sense of independence. When I went back to college, I called home every day to check on her, and every time I heard her voice, I felt relief followed immediately by guilt that I had left her there alone with her fear and our parents' overwhelming anxiety. The anniversary of her disappearance came and went. Lily was 17 by then, and in therapy and on medication for anxiety and depression. She told me once, late at night when we were both awake and talking on the phone, that she sometimes wished she could remember. She said not knowing was worse than knowing could ever be, that her imagination filled those 18 hours with horrors that might not be real, but felt real because she had nothing to replace them with. She said she felt like something had been taken from her. Not just time, but some essential part of herself. And she did not know if she would ever get it back. Now Lily is 20 and I am 23. She still lives with our parents, still sees a therapist, still has dreams about singing that draws her away from everything she knows. She graduated high school, but decided not to go to college, saying she could not handle being away from home. She works part-time at a bookstore in town and spends most of her free time reading, losing herself in other worlds because this one holds too much uncertainty. Sometimes I drive back to Monteagle and we go for walks together, always during the day, always where there are other people around. She never talks about what happened unless I ask, and even then her answers are vague and distant. She says she has accepted that she will never know, that some mysteries cannot be solved and some questions cannot be answered, but I can see in her eyes that she has not accepted it. Not really. The not knowing has become part of her, a permanent wound that never quite heals. I have done my own research into the other cases, reading everything I could find online, joining forums where people discuss unexplained disappearances. I have found dozens of similar stories from across the country, teenagers who vanished for hours or days and returned with no memory, many of them mentioning music or singing or voices calling them. No one has an explanation. Some people think it is trafficking networks using sophisticated drugs. Others believe it is something paranormal, something that exists in the spaces between our understanding of reality. I do not know what I believe. I only know that it happened to my sister, and that it could happen again to someone else, and that we are powerless to stop it or understand it. The police still call occasionally to see if Lily has remembered anything new. She has not. The case remains open but inactive, filed away with all the other mysteries that do not fit into neat categories of crime and motive and evidence. Our family has learned to live with the absence of answers, but it has changed us in ways both visible and hidden. We are more cautious now, more aware of how fragile safety is, how quickly everything can change. And we are grateful, so grateful, that Lily came home at all, because we know that some families are not so lucky. Some missing teenagers never come back, and that knowledge sits heavy in our hearts, a reminder that whatever happened to Lily, as terrible and inexplicable as it was, could have been so much worse. I'm a 29-year-old paramedic, and in 2021 I responded to a call at an abandoned nursing home in Crossville, Tennessee that had been closed for 10 years. What we found there still makes me question everything I thought I knew about death and what might come after. I have worked in emergency medicine for 7 years now, and I have seen terrible things, tragedies that would break most people, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night at Shady Grove Nursing Home. Some experiences change you in ways you cannot articulate, and this was one of them. The call came in around 11 at night on a cold January evening. Dispatch told us there was a teenager with a possible broken ankle at the old nursing home on Highway 1 and 27, and that the kid was scared and asking for medical assistance. My partner Derek and I exchanged glances when we heard the location. Everyone in Crossville knew about Shady Grove. It had been shut down a decade earlier after scandal involving patient neglect and several suspicious deaths. The building had sat empty ever since, slowly decaying, becoming a destination for teenagers looking for thrills and urban explorers documenting abandoned places. We responded to calls there maybe twice a year, always kids who had broken in and hurt themselves. We arrived at the site within 10 minutes. The building was massive, 3 stories of brick and broken windows, surrounded by an overgrown parking lot and a chain-link fence that had been cut open in multiple places. Our headlights swept across the facade, and I could see graffiti covering the lower walls, boards over some windows, and the general aura of decay that settles over places humans have abandoned. Derek grabbed the medical bag, and I took the stretcher, and we made our way through one of the gaps in the fence toward the main entrance. The front doors had been pried open long ago and hung at odd angles. We called out as we entered, announcing ourselves, and heard a response from somewhere on the second floor. A teenage voice, shaky and scared, saying he was up here, that he needed help. We found the stairs and climbed carefully, testing each step before putting our full weight on it. The interior was worse than the exterior. Ceiling tiles had fallen, exposing pipes and wiring. The walls were water damaged and covered in mold. Trash and debris littered the floor. It smelled like rot and mildew and something else underneath, something old and unpleasant. We found the kid in a hallway on the second floor, sitting against a wall with his legs stretched out in front of him. He was maybe 16, wearing a hoodie and jeans, and his face was pale with pain and fear. His ankle was clearly broken, swollen, and sitting at the wrong angle. I knelt beside him and started my assessment while Derek set up our equipment. The kid kept looking around nervously, his eyes darting to the open doorways lining the hall, to the darkness at either end of the corridor. I asked him what had happened, and he said he and some friends had dared each other to spend the night in the building. He had been exploring when he heard something and started running, fell through a weak section of floor, and his ankle took the impact. I asked where his friends were, and he said they had left him, that they had gotten scared and run. I told him we would get him out of here and to a hospital where they could fix his ankle properly. But then he said something that made me pause. He said he was not calling about the ankle. He said he was calling because of what he saw. I exchanged another look with Derek and asked him what he meant. The kid said he had been lying here for over an hour, too scared to move, watching the rooms around him. He said he saw patients in the beds, transparent but visible. He said he saw nurses walking the halls in the old-fashioned uniforms, passing right through the debris on the floor. He said he heard call buttons going off even though the building had no power, that ding, ding, ding sound nursing homes make when patients need assistance. I told him he might be in shock, that injuries can sometimes make people see things. But even as I said it, I felt uneasy. The building did feel wrong in a way I could not articulate. Too cold, too quiet, but also somehow too alive. Derek was giving me a look that said, "Let us get this kid out of here fast." We were preparing to splint the ankle when we all heard it. The call button sound clear and unmistakable, coming from multiple rooms at once. Ding, 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 ding. The kid started crying, saying, "CC, I told you." Derek stood up, his flashlight sweeping the hallway, and even in the beam I could see his hands were shaking. I've never seen Derek scared. He is former military, unflappable, the kind of partner you want in any emergency. But now his face had gone tight and pale. Then we heard the voice, an elderly woman calling out from one of the rooms, "Nurse, nurse, I need help." The voice was thin and wavering and absolutely real. I stood slowly, my heart hammering, and looked at Derek. He shook his head, a small, sharp movement that said, "Do not investigate." But I was already moving toward the doorway, where the voice had come from. I had to know. I had to see. The room was at the end of the hall, door hanging open. I shone my flashlight inside and saw an empty space, a metal bed frame with no mattress, a broken nightstand, walls covered in peeling paint. Nothing else. But as I stood there, I saw something forming in the doorway of the attached bathroom. A figure, translucent but visible, an elderly woman in a hospital gown. She was solid enough that I could see her features, her white hair, her confused expression. She looked directly at me and pointed down the hallway, urgently, as if trying to tell me something. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam passing through her body without resistance. Derek grabbed my arm and said we were leaving now, that we would come back for the kid if we had to, but we needed to get out. But I could not move. I was frozen, staring at this woman who should not exist, who was looking at me with desperate, pleading eyes. She pointed again, more insistently, down the hall toward the far end of the building. Then she faded, growing less distinct, until she was gone entirely. The kid was screaming now, saying there were more, that he could see them in all the rooms, dozens of them. Derek and I both saw them then, shadows moving in doorways, shapes that suggested human forms, the impression of faces looking out at us. The call buttons continued their chorus, overlapping, creating a rhythm that felt almost intentional. And underneath it all, I heard breathing, labored and raspy, the sound of many people struggling to draw air into failing lungs. We got the kid up between us, Derek supporting one side, me the other, his broken ankle dragging as we moved as quickly as we dared toward the stairs. The shadows followed us, keeping pace, staying just at the edge of our flashlight beams. I heard Derek praying under his breath, something I had never heard him do before. The kid had gone quiet, either from shock or pain or fear, I could not tell. When we reached the stairwell, the temperature dropped. So suddenly, I could see my breath. The lights on our equipment flickered, even though they were battery-powered. And standing at the bottom of the stairs, blocking our exit, I saw the woman again. But this time she was not alone. There were others with her, a group of elderly figures in hospital gowns and pajamas, all of them looking up at us with expressions that ranged from confusion to anger to something that might have been hope. Derek said a word I will not repeat and started down the stairs anyway, walking straight toward them. I followed, keeping the kid steady, expecting to feel something as we passed through the group. But there was nothing, just cold air and the sense of resistance like walking through water. When we reached the bottom and looked back, they were gone. The hallway above us was empty except for the debris and darkness. We got the kid to the ambulance, and I worked on stabilizing his ankle while Derek called for police backup. The kid was babbling, talking about the faces, about how many there were, about the woman who had pointed down the hall. I gave him something for the pain, and he finally went quiet, staring at the ceiling of the ambulance with wide, empty eyes. The police arrived, and we gave them a report. They went inside to check the building, but came back saying they found nothing unusual, no signs of anyone else, no explanation for what we claimed to have experienced. They suggested we were tired, that old buildings make strange sounds, that shadows can play tricks. But I saw the doubt in their eyes, the way they kept looking back at the nursing home like it might reach out and grab them. Later, after we dropped the kid at the hospital, I did some research. Shady Grove nursing home had been shut down after an investigation revealed that 23 patients had died there over an 18-month period, all from neglect or abuse. The staff had been understaffed and overwhelmed, and patients had been left in beds for days without care. Many had died alone, their call buttons going unanswered, their pleas for help ignored. The families had sued and won, but no criminal charges were ever filed. The facility closed quietly and the owners disappeared, moving to another state. I found articles about paranormal investigation teams who had documented activity at the site, electronic voice phenomena, apparitions, the sound of call buttons, even though there was no power. Multiple teams had recorded the same things we experienced. The woman in the hospital gown appeared in several photographs, always pointing down the same hallway, toward the wing where most of the deaths had occurred. The building was scheduled for demolition, but construction workers refused to enter it after several reported seeing the same apparitions, hearing the same sounds. The project stalled, and the building still stands today, empty and waiting. Dispatch stopped sending emergency services there after our report, marking it as a no-go zone except in life-threatening emergencies. Derek quit EMS a month after that night. He said he could not do it anymore, could not risk seeing something like that again. He moved to a different county and took a job in construction. I stayed on, but I requested they remove Shady Grove from our coverage area. They agreed without argument. I think they were relieved to have a reason to avoid the place officially. Sometimes I think about the woman, about the way she pointed down that hallway, about what she might have been trying to tell me. I think about all those people who died there, calling for help that never came, suffering in a place that was supposed to care for them. And I wonder if that suffering left an imprint, if trauma and neglect can create something that persists after death, an echo of pain that refuses to fade. I still work as a paramedic, and I still respond to calls in abandoned buildings and dangerous places. But I am more careful now about what I dismiss as imagination or exhaustion, because I know what I saw in Shady Grove, and I know it was real, and that knowledge has changed the way I understand the world and what might exist in the spaces between life and death. 3 years ago, when I was 25, I took a job as a night janitor at a storage facility outside Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. It was easy money for basically doing nothing, or so I thought. The pay was decent, the work was simple, and I needed the cash to help my mom with her medical bills after she got diagnosed with diabetes. The job seemed perfect. I would show up at 10 at night, clean the common areas, make sure everything was locked up properly, and leave at 6 in the morning. Most nights I would not see a single person. It was just me, 200 storage units, and the quiet darkness of rural Tennessee, until the night I discovered what was really being stored in Unit 47. The facility was owned by a man named Carl, who lived about 30 miles away and rarely showed up. He would check in maybe once a week to collect deposits and make sure everything was running smoothly, but otherwise I was completely on my own. The rules were simple. Keep the bathrooms and office clean. Make sure the gates were locked. Do not go into the storage units. That last rule was emphasized more than once. Carl said people rented the units for privacy, and I was to respect that. If a unit was open, I was to close it and report it, but I was never to look inside. He paid me under the table, cash every Friday, no questions asked. I should have known that was a red flag. For the first 2 months, nothing unusual happened. I would arrive at 10, park my car near the office, and start my rounds. The facility was laid out in rows of identical metal units, all painted the same faded blue, numbered 1 through 200. Some were small, barely bigger than a closet. Others were the size of a one-car garage. Most sat empty, their owners having abandoned them or fallen behind on payments. The occupied units were scattered throughout, maybe 40 or 50 total. I learned to identify them by the locks, the newer padlocks standing out against the rust and decay. Then I started noticing Unit 47. It was in the back row, one of the larger units, and it seemed to get a lot of visitors at odd hours. 2 or 3 times a week, I would see vehicles pulling up to it around 2 or 3 in the morning. Different vehicles each time, trucks and vans and sedans, but always the same pattern. They would park, someone would unlock the unit, the door would roll up just high enough for them to duck inside, and then 5 or 10 minutes later, they would come out carrying boxes or large bags. The door would roll back down, they would lock it, and they would drive away. The whole transaction took maybe 15 minutes. I mentioned it to Carl during one of his Friday visits. I said Unit 47 was getting a lot of late-night traffic and asked if that was normal. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then said, "It was not my business what people stored or when they accessed their units." He said my job was to clean and lock up, nothing more. He said if I wanted to keep getting paid, I should stop asking questions. The way he said it made my stomach turn, but I needed the money, so I nodded and let it drop. But I could not stop thinking about it. Something felt wrong. The secrecy, the late hours, the different vehicles. It reminded me of things I had read about, operations that use storage facilities as distribution points for drugs or stolen goods. I told myself I was overthinking it, that plenty of people kept strange hours and did not want their business observed. But the feeling persisted, a nagging sense that I was witnessing something illegal and choosing to ignore it. Then one night in late November, I heard arguing coming from Unit 47. It was around 3 in the morning and I was in the office doing paperwork when I heard raised voices. A man's voice, angry and insistent, and then a woman's voice responding. I could not make out the words, but the woman sounded upset, maybe crying. Then silence. I stood up and looked out the office window toward the back row. A white van was parked in front of Unit 47, its door open, the interior light on. I could see movement inside the storage unit, but the angle was wrong to see what was happening. The voices started again, lower this time, more controlled. Then the woman cried out, a sharp sound of pain or fear that made my blood run cold. I grabbed my phone and started to walk toward the unit, not sure what I was going to do, but knowing I could not just stand there. Before I got halfway across the facility, the van's engine started, and it pulled away quickly, tires squealing on the pavement. The storage unit door was closed and locked as if nothing had happened. I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. Call the police and say, what? I heard arguing and a woman crying. That was not enough. And if Carl found out I had called the cops on one of his clients, I would lose my job, and my mom would lose the help she needed. I went back to the office and tried to forget about it. But sleep did not come easy that night, or any night after. A week later, the pattern changed. The white van came back, but this time it stayed longer, maybe an hour. Other vehicles showed up too, 3 of them, all parking near Unit 47. People went in and out, carrying things I could not identify from my position in the office. Then one of them left the door open just slightly while they went back to their vehicle for something. I could see a sliver of the interior, just a narrow band of light from their flashlight. My conscience was eating at me. I kept thinking about that woman's cry, about what might be happening in that unit while I mopped floors and pretended not to notice. I made a decision. When they closed up and left, I was going to take a quick look. Just a glance through the crack under the door or around the side, just enough to confirm my suspicions one way or the other. Then I would decide whether to call the police or let it go. The vehicles finally left around 4:30 in the morning. I waited 15 minutes to make sure no one was coming back. Then I walked to Unit 47 with my flashlight. The lock was back in place, the door shut tight. I crouched down and tried to see under the door, but the gap was too small. I walked around the side, checking for any opening, any way to see inside without breaking in. That was when I noticed the ventilation grate near the top of the unit, a small metal grate about 6 inches square. I dragged over a crate I found nearby and climbed up, shining my light through the grate. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. The unit was set up like a makeshift living space. Multiple mattresses on the floor, buckets in the corner that I realized were makeshift toilets, bottles of water stacked against one wall, chains bolted to the floor, empty food wrappers everywhere. This was not storage. This was a place where people were being kept. I nearly fell off the crate in my rush to get down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I called 911 and tried to keep my voice steady as I explained what I had seen. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in the unit currently, and I said I did not think so, that the people had left about 20 minutes earlier. She said officers were on the way and that I should wait in a safe location and not approach the unit again. I went back to the office and locked the door, watching through the window for the police to arrive. It took them maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When they got there, I met them outside and explained everything. What I had seen through the vent, the late-night visitors, the woman crying. They asked for my key to the unit, but I told them only Carl had keys to individual units, that I just had the master key to the gates and office. They called for a cutting tool and went to work on the lock. When they got the door open and I saw their faces, I knew it was bad. They cleared the unit and then called for more backup, for detectives, for evidence techs. They asked me detailed questions about the vehicles I had seen, the times, how long this had been going on. I told them everything I could remember, kicking myself for not paying closer attention, for not acting sooner. Over the next several hours, the facility turned into a crime scene. Carl showed up, called by the police, and his face went white when he saw the activity. He claimed he had no idea what the unit was being used for, that the renter had paid in cash and provided fake information, that this was the first he was hearing about any problem. The police did not seem to believe him. The investigation revealed that Unit 47 and 2 others at the facility were being used as waypoints in a human trafficking operation. People were brought there, kept for short periods, then moved to other locations. The mattresses, the chains, the supplies all pointed to a coordinated operation that had been running for at least a year. Evidence recovered from the units led to arrests across 3 states and the rescue of multiple victims from other locations. Carl was arrested as an accomplice. The police found records showing he had been receiving extra payments from the traffickers, that he had looked the other way deliberately. He got 30 years. The others involved got similar or longer sentences. My testimony was crucial in the trial, establishing the timeline and patterns that helped prosecutors build their case. The media called me a hero, but I did not feel like one. I felt like someone who had ignored obvious signs for months because it was easier than getting involved. I thought about all the nights I had cleaned bathrooms and taken my paycheck while people were suffering 50 yards away. I thought about the woman whose cry I had heard and wondered if she had been rescued or if I had been too late for her. I quit the job immediately after everything came out. I could not go back to that facility, could not walk past Unit 47 knowing what had happened there. I found work at a warehouse during the day, regular hours with regular people around. The pay was less, but I did not care. Some jobs are not worth any amount of money. My mom was upset when I told her why I quit, not because of the lost income, but because of the danger I had put myself in. She said I should have called the police the first time I noticed something strange, that no job was worth staying silent about something like that. She was right, and I have had to live with that knowledge every day since. I think about those people often, the ones who were kept in that unit, who were scared and alone and waiting to be moved like cargo. I think about how close I came to never looking, to finishing my shifts and going home and letting it continue. And I think about all the other storage facilities and warehouses and empty buildings where terrible things might be happening right now while people walk past and mind their own business. If there is any lesson I learned from this, it is that ignoring your instincts has a cost. When something feels wrong, it probably is wrong, and pretending otherwise does not make you safe or smart. It just makes you complicit. I will never make that mistake again. I will never prioritize my comfort over someone else's suffering, never again choose ignorance because the truth is inconvenient. Because those people in Unit 47 deserved better, and I should have given it to them sooner.